The morning sun stretched across the dusty fields, spilling golden light over the quiet village. Birds chirped from the rooftops, roosters crowed, and the smell of fresh bread from the baker's stall mixed with the earthy scent of wet soil. The market was alive. Vendors shouted prices, children darted between stalls, and women bargained with their sharp, musical voices. Into this lively scene walked a man whose appearance made heads turn. His shirt was faded, patched at the shoulders, and his trousers bore the stains of earth and labor. His boots were cracked at the edges, worn from years of use. On his head, a straw hat sat lopsided, shielding his weathered face from the sun. He carried a small cloth bag in one hand, filled with seeds. The laughter began softly at first. A few teenagers at the corner whispered, then chuckled louder. "Look at him." One sneered, nudging his friend. "Still dresses like a beggar." Another smirked. "Probably doesn't even have enough to buy fresh clothes. Why does he come here anyway? He doesn't belong." Their voices carried, and soon others joined in. A group of merchants leaned against their stalls, snickering. A woman in bright bangles crossed her arms and shook her head. Such shame, walking among decent folk like that. The farmer heard them. He paused by a fruit stall, pulled out a few coins, and quietly bought 2 apples. His fingers were rough, his nails dark from soil, but he handled the fruit gently, like it was precious. A child stared at him curiously. "Mama, why do people laugh at him?" the little girl whispered. Her mother hushed her quickly, embarrassed, before murmuring, "Because he's poor, my dear. People like him never rise above their place." The farmer took a slow bite of the apple. The crunch echoed faintly against the hum of the crowd. He didn't look at the mockers, nor did he answer their insults. Instead, he smiled faintly, his eyes carrying a calmness that unsettled those watching closely. It was the kind of calm that seemed to know something they didn't. But what they didn't realize, what not a single soul in that crowded market knew, was that beneath those patched clothes was a man of unimaginable means. His land stretched across valleys. His name appeared in city banks, in deeds, in ownership papers of factories and businesses. But he chose silence. He chose humility. Yet, that very silence would soon shake their world. A group of wealthier townsfolk approached, dressed in neat coats and polished shoes. One of them, a stout man with a heavy gold ring, laughed openly. "Why don't you go back to your farm, old man? This market is for respectable buyers, not ragged scarecrows." The crowd roared with laughter. The farmer's hand tightened slightly around the apple. For a brief second, his jaw clenched. But then he raised his head, looked the man directly in the eye, and spoke in a low, steady voice. "Respect doesn't come from clothes. It comes from how you live your life." A hush fell over the group. The mockers shifted uneasily. There was something in his tone, a quiet authority, that made their laughter falter. But before anyone could react, a commotion stirred at the edge of the market. A caravan of shiny cars rolled in, kicking up dust. Men in suits stepped out, adjusting their ties, their eyes sharp and calculating. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "Businessmen from the city," someone gasped. "What are they doing here?" The farmer stood still, his gaze following the newcomers. A storm was brewing, and the mocking crowd had no idea that the ragged man they ridiculed was about to become the center of it all. What business could these wealthy strangers possibly have in the small village, and how would the farmer's secret tie into their plans? The sun hung higher now, casting sharper shadows across the village square. The market, usually filled with laughter and gossip, grew tense as the sleek black cars stopped one after another. Their engines purred like beasts unfamiliar to the dusty roads of the countryside. Doors swung open. Out stepped men in crisp suits, their shoes shining as if they had never touched dirt. Their hair was combed back perfectly, watches glittering on their wrists. The villagers whispered, craning their necks to see. "Look at those cars," one boy gasped, his eyes wide. "They must be from the city." An older man muttered, "Only rich men dress like that." The businessmen walked with confidence, their steps echoing on the stone path. They ignored the villagers, as if these simple folk were invisible. The leader, a tall man with sharp cheekbones and a silver tie, raised his hand. "People of this village," he announced, his voice commanding attention. "We are here on behalf of a large corporation. We wish to purchase the farmlands near the river and the fields stretching beyond the hills. We will pay handsomely." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Farmers exchanged nervous glances. Women clutched their baskets tighter. The idea of quick money danced in their minds, but so did fear. The tall man smiled coldly. "This is an opportunity to become rich, to leave behind your hard labor. Imagine, no more sweating under the sun, no more living in patched clothes. With one signature, your lives will change." At that, a few villagers turned instinctively to look at the farmer in the faded shirt, the man who had just been mocked hours earlier. He stood quietly at the edge of the crowd, his bag of seeds still slung over his shoulder. His face remained calm, but his eyes narrowed. One of the businessmen leaned toward the leader and whispered, "Who owns the largest field by the river?" A young boy, eager to be noticed, shouted from the crowd, pointing at the farmer, "That poor man over there." Laughter erupted again. The businessmen smirked. One of them, adjusting his gold watch, scoffed, "Surely this is a joke. That man, in rags, he owns the river field." The villagers chuckled nervously, glancing between the farmer and the suited men. The air buzzed with tension. The farmer took a slow step forward. His boots pressed into the dirt with a steady rhythm. The crowd grew quiet, waiting. When he finally stopped, the sunlight caught his face, and his voice cut through the silence. "It is no joke," he said firmly. "The land you speak of belongs to me." The marketplace froze. Every sound seemed to vanish. The clatter of pots, the cries of vendors, even the rustling of leaves in the wind. Eyes widened, jaws dropped. The tall businessman raised an eyebrow. "You claim ownership?" The farmers gazed in waver. "I do not claim. I own." For a long moment, no one dared to laugh. The same man they had mocked that morning now stood with a certainty that silenced even the proud city men. Finally, the leader chuckled softly. "Very well. If you truly own it, we will speak of price. Sell to us, and we will make you richer than you could ever imagine." The farmer said nothing. He simply looked toward the horizon, where his fields stretched like golden waves under the sun. And in that heavy silence, the villagers realized something far greater than money was at stake. Would the farmer give in to the glittering offers of the city men, or reveal a truth that would shake everyone to their core? That night, the village could not sleep. The usual calm of the evening, the crackle of lanterns, the murmur of families gathered for dinner, was replaced with restless chatter. Whispers spread like fire in dry grass. "Did you hear what he said?" one man asked his neighbor. "They say he owns the river fields." "No, not just the river fields," another interrupted, lowering his voice. "I heard he controls land all the way to the hills. Some even say he has businesses in the city." The villagers sat in circles, gossiping under the stars. Suspicion and curiosity filled the air. And at the heart of it all sat the farmer, alone outside his modest home. The glow of a lantern cast shadows across his weathered face as he quietly sharpened his sickle. Each scrape of metal against stone echoed into the night. An old friend approached cautiously. "Is it true?" he asked, voice trembling. The farmer looked up, his eyes calm. "What do you believe?" I never thought you had such wealth." The farmer smiled faintly, setting the sickle aside. "Wealth is not always meant to be shown. Sometimes it is meant to be used when the time is right." The old friend sat beside him, silent. The night breeze carried the scent of wet earth and faraway fires. For a moment, neither spoke. Then the farmer added softly, "What use is wealth if it robs you of humility?" The words hung in the air, heavy and thoughtful. Meanwhile, in the crowded houses across the village, envy began to stir. Some villagers who once mocked him now bit their lips in regret. Others whispered with bitterness, "He fooled us all. He made us laugh at him while he sat on riches. Why keep his secret? Unless he wanted to look down on us." By dawn, the tension grew thicker. Children peeked out of their windows, watching as the farmer walked calmly to his fields, carrying his bag of seeds as always. He moved with the same quiet rhythm, as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. At the market, Villagers gathered again, their voices loud with curiosity. The businessmen from the city had returned, this time with sharper intentions. Their polished shoes struck the ground like hammers, their eyes searching for the man who had dared stand against them. "There he is," one of them muttered, spotting the farmer walking through the square. The leader stepped forward, his voice loud and challenging. "You spoke yesterday of ownership. Today we demand proof. Show us the deeds, the documents. Show us you truly are who you claim." The crowd leaned in, holding their breath. The mockery from yesterday had turned into something else, an eager hunger to see the truth laid bare. Some prayed he was lying, so they could laugh again. Others prayed he was truthful, so they could finally feel proud of the man they once scorned. The farmer stopped, his gaze steady. He reached into his worn coat, fingers trembling slightly. The crowd held its collective breath. Slowly, he pulled out a leather-bound folder. Dusty, old, but solid. "This," he said quietly, "is the truth you seek." He held it up for all to see. The crowd erupted into whispers, their voices crashing over one another. And in that moment, the village realized the ragged farmer was far more than what he appeared. But proof alone would not silence the greedy. The businessmen had come not just to buy, but to test his strength in front of everyone. Would he stand firm or bend under the pressure? The morning sun poured over the market square, but instead of the usual chatter and laughter, there was silence. Everyone had gathered, farmers, merchants, children perched on rooftops, all waiting to see what would happen next. The farmer stood in the center, his worn boots pressing into the dusty ground. In his hand, the leather folder rested like a shield. Inside were the deeds, the papers, the undeniable proof that the land was his. The leader of the businessmen sneered, folding his arms. "Words mean nothing. Show us proof." The farmer opened the folder calmly, pulling out documents one by one. The crowd leaned in, eyes wide. The papers bore official seals, signatures, and stamps. They weren't rumors. They weren't lies. They were the truth. Gasps erupted. Mothers clutched their children closer. Old men whispered to each other, shaking their heads in disbelief. One of the businessmen snatched a paper from the farmer's hand and studied it. His jaw tightened. He could not deny it. With a frustrated grunt, he shoved it back. "It seems you are indeed the owner," he muttered. The leader, however, did not falter. He stepped closer, lowering his voice but loud enough for all to hear. "Then sell. We will pay you more than this land could ever yield. We'll make you richer than any farmer has a right to be." A hush fell over the crowd. Some villagers' eyes lit with greed at the thought. They imagined mansions, silk clothes, and gold coins. They silently urged the farmer to accept, but the man in the patched shirt only shook his head slowly. His voice was steady, but filled with quiet fire. "This land is not for sale. It is the sweat of my father, the gift of my grandfather, and the hope of my children. No amount of gold can buy that." The word struck the crowd like a bell. Many lowered their heads in shame, remembering their laughter from before. His humility, his loyalty, his love for the land, it was something no riches could replace. The leader's eyes darkened. He leaned closer, his tone sharp. "Do not mistake stubbornness for strength. If you refuse us, you will regret it." The farmer met his gaze, unblinking. "A man who stands for nothing falls for everything. I will not fall." For a moment, it felt as if the world had stopped. The wind carried dust across the square, rustling clothes and rattling signs. The crowd held its breath. Then slowly applause broke out. It began with one pair of hands, then another, until the entire marketplace thundered with claps and cheers. The same people who had mocked him now shouted his name with pride. But not everyone clapped. In the corner, a few men exchanged dark glances. Envy burned in their eyes. Hatred brewed in their silence. The businessmen turned back toward their cars, their polished shoes crunching against gravel. The leader looked over his shoulder, his lips curling into a cold smile. "This is not over," he warned. And with that, the cars roared to life, leaving a trail of dust behind. The farmer stood tall, the folder still in his hand. The villagers gathered around him now, no longer mocking, but seeking protection in his strength. But as the cheers faded, the farmer's eyes searched the crowd. He could feel it. Hidden among the smiles and praise, envy was waiting. Quiet, dangerous, and patient. The businessman had left, but a new enemy was rising. Someone closer. Someone hidden in plain sight. Who would dare challenge the farmer next? The days that followed were unlike any the village had seen before. The market, once filled with whispers of mockery, now buzzed with a new tone, respect. Vendors who once laughed offered him the best fruits. Children who had pointed at his tattered clothes now ran to greet him with bright smiles. Even the proudest merchants bowed their heads when he walked past. But the farmer did not change. He still wore his patched shirt, still walked with his steady, unhurried steps, still carried his bag of seeds over his shoulder. One morning, as he bought bread from the baker, a young man couldn't hold back his curiosity. "Sir," he asked, eyes wide, "why do you live so simply when you could wear silk and gold?" The farmer paused, holding the warm bread in his calloused hands. He looked around at the faces watching him, waiting for an answer. His voice was calm, soft, but every word carried weight. Because respect earned from riches fades as quickly as riches do. But respect earned from humility lasts forever. Silence fell over the market. Even the birds seemed to stop singing, as if the world itself was listening. The villagers shifted uneasily, ashamed. They remembered their laughter, their insults, their mockery. They had judged him by his clothes, not his character. And now, standing before him, they saw not just a rich man, but a man of honor. The applause that followed wasn't loud or hurried this time. It was steady, heartfelt. People clapped with tears in their eyes, not because of his wealth, but because of the truth in his words. Still, envy lingered in shadows. Not everyone celebrated him. Some whispered in corners, "He should have sold the land. We could all be rich. Why should one man hold so much while we have so little?" But the farmer never paid attention to such voices. He tilled his soil, fed the hungry, and gave work to those who needed it. His wealth, though vast, was used not for pride, but for people. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, he stood alone by the river. The water shimmered like molten gold, reflecting the fading light. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply. The wind carried the laughter of children, the chatter of families, the sound of a village at peace. He whispered to himself, "This is wealth. Not coins, not clothes, but this." Behind him, footsteps approached. It was the same old friend who had questioned him days ago. The man placed a hand on the farmer's shoulder. "They finally see who you are." The farmer smiled faintly, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "They see only what they want to see. The truth is simpler. I am just a man who loves his land." The two stood in silence as the night embraced the village. And so, the farmer who had been mocked for his simple clothes became the most respected soul in the land. Not because he was the richest man in the country, but because he carried his riches with humility, hidden in his heart. Tell me, what do you think truly defines a person's worth? What they wear, what they own, or the humility they carry in their soul?